programs and services, and they said, I don't even have time to think about it because it clouds up my brain because I can't tell how they're contributing to what I'm being held accountable for, right? If I'm being held accountable for high school graduation rates and I ask one of these programs how they're contributing to that, I can't get a straight answer, right? I can't get a straight answer. I think they are, but I don't know that they are. So at some point the question we get, how are we going to figure this all out? So Jeffrey Kennedy and Harlan kind of figured out a way to do it where he was sort of providing a host of services, providing wraparound services to a lot of kids. But what I think we came to realize, and what he came to realize was that was a lot easier to do because in most communities we're kind of stuck here, right? This is from Albuquerque, one of the 68 communities that I'll talk about today. But in Albuquerque, they had a room of people like this. They brought in their editorial cartoonist who was trying to figure out what the heck was going on. Right? What was this thing called Mission Graduate in Albuquerque? Just like Bridgeport prospers here, right? What is this thing? And he came back in the next few days in the paper, he put this. He says, it seems to me we need something like Bridgeport prospers. We need something called Mission Graduates in Albuquerque because unfortunately, a lot of the adults are just pointing at each other, right? A lot of the adults are saying, what I'm doing is great, right? But what you're doing is apparently not. Does this resonate? Right? It's kind of a hard thing to look at. When you think about it at its core, this is kind of what it's all about. Somebody just said a little bit earlier, we're better together. And no, I'm not advocating for a particular candidate. I was supposed to make people shut up. This is a really stressful time, folks. I was just supposed to make, okay. But we are better together, right? We are, in essence, when we are not doing this and we are actually wrapping our arms around each other, when we are actually trying to figure out what's going on, we're probably going to get better results. Would we agree with that? Right? Than pointing at each other? So what we realized when I was in Washington, D.C., what we realized in Cincinnati, what we realized in all these other communities is that we've got this problem where we are program rich and system poor. Right? We are program rich and system poor. In Cincinnati, we had the coroner of our community stand up at a session like this after we talked about wanting to get more kids into college because Cincinnati's in the Rust Belt, and if we don't get more kids into college, quite frankly, we're going to fall behind the global economy. The coroner of the community stood up and said, guys, we're not only going to not see more kids getting into college, I'm going to keep seeing dead kids on my tables. Dead kids on my tables if we don't stop being program rich and system poor. Right? We have to find a way to organize ourselves around the needs of individual kids. We keep waiting for the silver bullet. It's going to be this charter school. It's going to be this program. It's going to be this early childhood center. It's going to be this after school program. None of that is going to work all by itself, right? We are spraying and praying. We are spraying resources all over the place and praying good things happen, but we, the adults, are not getting our act in order, right? We, the adults, are not saying, Johnny needs this, Jamal needs this, Juanita needs this. We're going to make sure they get it. That's our job. Does that make sense? So the question is, what was going to be the solution? Well, in Cincinnati, after the coroner said that, we said, let's stop starting new programs for a while. Let's stop starting new stuff. Right? Let's start looking at what we're already doing. This is what gave birth to this idea of collective impact. Right? We didn't know what we were doing. We had no clue what we were doing. We were just kind of wandering around, and then these consultants came into town and looked at what we were doing and wrote a beautiful article. Right? For those of you who read it, I apologize. Right? Because it is the most sanitized version of reality that has ever existed. If you read that article, they make it sound like when you drive into Cincinnati, there's this warm glow. And you sort of feel this beautiful hum of angelic voices telling you that everything's great. That is not the case. Right? In Cincinnati right now, right, where I was the executive director, I was playing Frida's role for 6 years, everybody still is struggling with how to work together. There still is some finger pointing going on. But over time, we have had people start to say, you know what, this is what I'm really good at. I can contribute this. And this is what I'm really good at. And investors are starting to say, rather than just throwing money all over the place, if we know something works, how do we get resources behind it, right? That's what we're starting to see. And I'll talk more about those resources later. But the question is, what is the difference between collaboration and collective impact? What is the true difference? Very quickly. You're not convening around programs or initiatives, you're convening around outcomes. For those of you that are bored by what I'm saying, I don't blame you, right? You could look at this in your packet. You have a Bridgeport landscape of your outcomes. You are not organizing. You are not organizing around a specific program. You are not saying this thing is it. What you are saying is, here's some outcomes. let's figure out what works against it. And that brings us to the second difference, right? You're not using data to prove things anymore. You're using data to improve things. Unfortunately, most of the time in the social sector, data is used as what? A hammer, right? It's used as a hammer. For those of you that worked in schools like I have, my wife's a teacher, she feels like data is used to tell them what is good or what is bad. She does not feel like data is used to say, hey, we've learned something. How about thinking about incorporating this into what you're doing, right? I'm going to take a leap here for a second because this is going to feel really cold to a lot of you, but I'm just going to go out on a limb because I'm in Bridgeport. I hear there's a lot of hedge funds here. Is that true? I don't know. Is that true? All right, they're over here. All right, they're over there somewhere. Maybe over there somewhere. All right, but there's a lot of hedge funds in this town. And in Baltimore, they had a hedge fund, a husband and wife team. They were the ones that said, you know what, we're going to convene the community because we keep getting asked for people to give them money, and we think they're all amazing people, but we really don't know how to make sense of it, right? So they convened a big group of community leaders, and we went into their offices. And how many of you have ever been into a hedge fund manager's office? Okay, I had not. I thought I was walking into the Matrix. Has anybody ever seen that movie? You walk in there, and there are just numbers everywhere. I'm talking crazy, right? And then there's these people, and most of them look like they were like 7 or 8 years old, right? But they were down there like typing away and going crazy on these numbers. And throughout the meeting, those people would walk in, and they would slip a piece of paper to the husband or wife, and then they'd walk out, right? And then the husband or wife would get on his or her smartphone, tap something out, and then pay attention again. Finally, I was facilitating. I said, can we stop real quick? Can you tell me what's going on? Because I've never been in this kind of environment before, right? And they looked at me incredulously, because this is what they do every day, and they said, oh, well, they're just bringing in some data, and when they slip us a piece of paper, they're recommending that we maybe move money here in order to get a better result in the end, right? And we all stopped for a second. We said, who is doing that in the social sector? Think about that for a second. Who walks into the early childhood provider and says, you know what? Yeah, we were down the street, we were observing this here. We found out that when they had a certified teacher and a 12-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio, that is what led to the kid being on target developmentally by kindergarten. Who is walking into my wife, right? And she teaches developmental English at the local community college. Who's walking into her and saying, hey, you know what? We found out that if you put $100 aside, not you, the professor, the college, puts $100 aside to make sure that somebody can get transportation here on a regular basis who doesn't have a car and may not be able to afford a bus ticket. If you give that to them, they show up, right? 40% more. Wouldn't that be a great $100 to spend? Right? Nobody's doing that. That is the opportunity of Bridgeport Prospers. And in a little bit, I'm going to talk to you about how the next meeting I come to, and I'm not going to come unless this is the case. The next meeting I come to, there better be data all over these walls. Because I don't want to know anymore where things stand. I want to know what is working to move these numbers in the right direction. Does that make sense? All right. So that brings us to the next thing. This whole idea of collective impact should not be in addition to what you do. It should be what you do. Right? So back to the story I just told. Shouldn't it be not that you're just having to show up at meetings all the time, but when you show up at those meetings, you're getting information to do what you do every day better? Does that make sense? Right? When I worked at a high school, the principal, he would only show up once a week, which is a whole other story. We can talk about that one later if you want, preferably over here. But when he would show up, he would say, I got this great new collaboration I want you to be a part of, and all the teachers would dive into the table. Because they were like, I'm so tired, I can't do one more thing. Right? Because when they go to that meeting, they're not getting more information to do what they do every day better, they're getting more work. Does that make sense? All right, last piece. It's not about advocating for ideas, it's about advocating for what works. How powerful will it be, and how powerful is it becoming that when you come to these meetings, as you'll hear later on, you're starting to identify some things that actually are getting results in your community. You're starting to identify those things. That's empowering. That's not saying we need to go to anywhere else. You don't need to go to New York, you don't need to go to LA, you don't need to go anywhere else to find what works. There are things working right here in Bridgeport right now that nobody knows about. Right? You need to lift those things up. And it may not be the nonprofit that has a $10 million budget. It may be. But it may also be a nonprofit that has a $130,000 budget, or dare I say a $50,000 budget, that has found out something that works that nobody would have ever guessed. That's what we need to be looking at, right? Okay, so that's what collective impact is. Is that exciting? That's a little bit different than traditional collaboration, right? Okay, unfortunately, this whole idea of collective impact is getting watered down, but you all can make sure that that's not the case. And one thing that we're trying to do is bring some rigor to it. Unfortunately, people get to this point in collective impact and they're like, I don't really know what the heck to do, right? This is one of my favorite cartoons. This is how I did math when I was in college. And it never seemed to slip through the professor's sights that I would say, you know, you get to this point, and then all of a sudden the magic of the answer just magically appears, right? But this is a little bit how people feel about collective impact. But what we've been able to do is we've got this network of 68 communities now. You all are a part of it. 68 communities that are all trying to figure this out. And what I get to wake up every day now is thinking not just about Cincinnati, but thinking about the whole country. And how are people starting to become system rich instead of program rich, right? That's what I get to find out. And good news, we found some things that are really critical. Number one, there's 4 key principles. If you are not willing to talk about disparities, if you are not willing to talk about the fact that there are disparities based on race, economic, all kinds of different factors, if you cannot talk about that, you're not going to be able to do this work long term, right? I'm going to talk later about the difference between equality and equity. I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between the two. If you are not able to have those discussions over the long term, right, this will not work. Because in the end, there are disparities, and we have to address them. Next, you have to leverage existing assets. You can't all be sitting in this room because you think a new tidal wave of funding is going to come around. We have to work with our existing assets first, and then figure out how to attract more based on the impact we're having, right? Number 2, we have to build a culture of continuous improvement where data is used as a flashlight instead of a hammer. And number 4, you've got to engage the community and expert voice. When I say put data on the walls, I don't mean put the data on the walls that gives everybody the answers. I mean put data on the walls so that the parents, students, and others can actually help interpret it and tell us what is actually working for them. A quick story, San Antonio, right? San Antonio, attendance was a huge issue. And it's a big deal because in San Antonio, school funding is determined by how many kids are sitting in the seats, right? Big deal for San Antonio. They had a huge problem. They couldn't figure it out. They could not figure it out. And so a bunch of really wealthy people got in a room and they said, you know what, we've got the perfect solution. What do you think they said? What? Well, you guys are way ahead. Stop. No, you guys are right. Don't say the right answer. You're supposed to say the wrong answer. This is, now, what they said was, we're going to put up some billboards. Because clearly people have forgotten that it's important to go to school. Right? How many times have we done this? We will put some billboards up on the wall, and that's going to do it. We'll do some PSAs, public service announcements, and that'll take care of it. They were going to spend $7.8 million on this, right? Right before, there you go, you may not be able to read the signs. That's interesting. What they did is somebody said, right before they launched the campaign, they said, wait a minute, why don't we show some of this data to some parents? So they gave the data to some parents, and the parents were like, yes, we know why that is. When you got to the last round of school funding cuts, you made it so that you had to live a full mile from the school, not just a half mile from the school in order to get a bus. So the parents said, if you actually look at the kids that are not attending, they're probably the kids that are right next to the school. They don't feel safe getting to school, right? So they looked at the data, and lo and behold, they were right. Lo and behold, when they actually plotted the kids where they lived, the kids lived near the school. It cost $200,000 to shrink back down the bus lane, right? Lo and behold, attendance rates go up. You have to engage community voice in understanding the data. The data itself is not the answer. The data is a tool to inform better decision making, but it has to be interpreted by the people who are actually experiencing what the data is trying to tell us. Does that make sense? All right, so we've also learned some other stuff, and this is going to make your eyes cross, so don't try to read it. But we've essentially said that there are a set of developmental milestones. And all across the country right now, people say they're doing collective impact, and they're kind of stuck in the earliest stage. We call it exploring. And all that is when you're trying to organize yourself. Right? You're trying to organize yourself. And you look at this big document here, page, you know, the one that looks like this, that page. This one, this sort of gives you a sense. This gives you a sense of how you all have organized yourself. Let's not do that right now. Okay, let's get to the second phase. The second phase is what we call emerging. And that's where you actually have the courage to put your data. Right? This is where you actually have the courage to put your data out there. And that's, again, this baseline, the scorecard, Chapter 2 update. I would recommend taking a good close look at this. Right? Once again, if you're bored with what I'm saying, this could occupy you for the next hour if you really let it. Right? If you really dug into this for a second and jotted down some notes on it, I think you'd probably find some stuff to put up on the easels. Right? If I give you nothing, this will give you something. All right? But that's where that is. Where we think you guys are right now is, okay, you decided to put out your data, there's some disaggregated data. Oh, that was good. All right, there's some disaggregated data. Where we think you are right now is what we would call sustaining. Right? And this is quite frankly where most communities around the country try to do collective impact and stuff. Because what they like to do is come together once every other month and act like some miracle is going to occur. Right? Because they're meeting for 2 hours once every other month. Can I tell you, and somebody just said it, I think Kimberly said it from the mayor's office just a minute ago, collective impact is not going to happen because you all met for 4 hours today. I just want to be really clear about that. It's going to help because you're going to give some great feedback. But what is going to make a difference? What's going to happen when you move from emerging to sustaining is the great irony of collective impact. Collective impact actually depends less on the collective than it does on the individual. Let me say that one more time. The irony of collective impact is that it actually depends less on the collective than the individual. Right? So you've done the collective work up till now where you've got an agreement on your structure, you've got an agreement on your outcomes. That is awesome. Right now is when the heavy lifting begins. Right now is when the heavy lifting begins. And what that means is you have to start looking at your data, no matter who you are. If you are a practitioner working with kids, is what you're doing contributing to moving these outcomes? Honestly. Because if you're not honest about it, we're going to remain like that cartoon. Remember the cartoon where all the adults are saying, what I'm doing is great. What you're doing is the problem. Right? Everybody, if you're a practitioner, if you are a funder, I got to be honest, funders can be as much of a problem as the practitioners. Because if you put out RFPs every week, and the best grant writer wins versus the most impactful practitioner, that is not cool. Right? That doesn't get us to results. If you are a faith leader working in a church and you mobilize the congregation to go volunteer, but they volunteer to do something that does not work. Right? Is that good? Is that good? That's not good. So the bottom line is where we are is how are individuals going to change their behavior every day? And here's how they do it. How many people have ever seen this cartoon? How many people have ever seen this? Yes. Isn't it amazing what a difference the word "to" makes? Because I love coming into these rooms and I actually can get people sometimes pretty fired up. And then I say this, what I just said a minute ago, where you may have to change your behavior. And all of a sudden it's like, I am in a morgue. Right? But all of us at this point in the journey are going to have to change our behavior. But we're going to have to change our behavior not based on what we think is right alone, what we believe is right in our hearts. We're going to have to change our behavior based on an honest understanding of what really works for kids. So how does that happen in other communities? Very quickly. Well, the number one thing they do is they start to realize exactly what I just said. That systems are not something up in the cloud. Systems are made of people. Everybody's heard the term systems change. Merle, is that one of the terms that you threw out there? Everybody loves that term systems change because it feels like it's distant from them. And they can say, yeah, that's what we need. We need systems change. Right? Systems are made up of people. All of you are the education system of Bridgeport. Right? So if we want the system to change, how do we change it? The individuals within the system have to change. Does that make sense? So don't think of system change as something way off on the horizon. So here's an example from Tucson. Here's an example from Tucson. They call it Cradle to Curriculum County in Tucson. When anybody walks into their meetings, they don't even get to sit down, right? They could go over and grab some coffee. They could get some stuff. But they don't even let them sit down. What they put is up on the board, they say, go find a partner, and all around the room they have kindergarten readiness, early grade reading, middle grade math, high school graduation, college entrance, degree completion, right? And they have where it stands. And then underneath that, they have all the data they've got on practices that impact those outcomes. And it's not practices from Denver, it's not practices from New York. The team, the staff of cradle to career, Pima County, their job is to figure out what is working for kids. Does that make sense? And then they ask everybody in the room to go around, take sticky notes, and ask them what resonates with you. What seems to be working? What do you think we need to do more of? Right? What do we need to do less of? What isn't working? And then the whole meeting is focused on understanding what is the data saying that we need to be paying attention to. And then they finish the meeting with action groups. Nobody gets to leave the room. Nobody. Until they've written down, based on what I've learned today, this is what I'm going to do differently between this meeting and the next. And then they collect those action commitments, and guess how they start the next meeting? How did you do on your action? Right? How did you do on your action commitment? And everybody quickly goes around when they walk in, they say, this is how I did. I didn't actually make any progress, but I'm going to make progress and keep at it. And every meeting, they're challenging people to not just come and talk about changing the behavior, they are actually challenging them to change their behavior each and every day. Does that make sense? So what does that mean? What kind of data are they looking at? Here's an example from Portland, Oregon, all right? They wanted to focus on college enrollment, and they're not collecting data from 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. They're collecting data from January 1st to January 30th to February 5th to February 12th. They are tracking it every week now. Every single week. You can get this data. Right here in Bridgeport, right now, you can get this data, right? And then look, lo and behold, this year they saw a jump. Now, in education, we are infamous for seeing jumps like this. And what do? That was super awesome. Let's celebrate it. And let's just keep doing what we've always been doing. Right? But in Portland, they said, no, that's not good enough. Let's actually figure it out. They broke down the data. And they said, look, we've been doing these FAFSA nights forever, these financial aid form completion nights. How many people here have ever completed a financial aid form? Okay, I don't know what your politics are, and I don't really care. But what I do care about is that the Obama administration has shrunk that bit down from this thick to about this thick, which is awesome, right? So there's one accomplishment, okay? For sure. So here you go. They've said they used to do these FAFSA nights all the time, and that's where they'd always get to about 50%. But what happened this year was an economics teacher was part of the FAFSA night, and he or she, I don't know if it was a man or woman, said, why don't I just make it part of my class? Why don't I just make completing the financial aid form part of your economics class? It totally makes sense. You know, you gotta look at taxes, you gotta look at income, you gotta look at all this stuff. It's perfect. So lo and behold, they incorporate it, boom, there's a big jump. Then they bring in the nonprofit programs and they say, can you guys go find the kids that didn't complete their classroom work and make sure that they actually complete it? So the nonprofits weren't running around chasing the kids that already completed the form. They were chasing the kids who had not completed the form. Does that make sense? And then they said, let's do a little bit more. Let's get more of our staff internally figuring this out. They got all the way up to 80%, right? And more importantly, they knew why. They knew why. And guess what? Now there's 5 other high schools that have said, I don't know that that's exactly what's going to work in my school, but we're going to start tracking data week to week, and that's what we're going to start doing. And now we're going to connect to college enrollment, and lo and behold, we'll start seeing kids who are typically disenfranchised, who typically don't go to college, going to college. And it didn't cost $10 million. It meant we were just being more purposeful with the data that we have right now. Does that make sense? Another example. This comes from Racine, Wisconsin. All right, it's not size-wise, it's kind of comparable. I was talking with Merle about this last night. I don't know the ins and outs. You're going to have to talk to your friends there. The United Way, the head of the United Way, Rodney Prudy, is fantastic, and they were funding of this thing called Hope Schools, where they do tutoring in schools, different levels, different amounts, different numbers of kids participating. They had 3 different types, and they actually looked at the data. And by the way, we had our national convening of 68 communities last week, and they presented this, right? They were very open and transparent about this. They actually looked at the data, and each dot represents a kid. And what did this tell them? Come on, give me one person. What do you think this might have told them? Just looking at it.
No clue.
No clue? What it actually said to them was, there's not a whole lot of difference based on their different types of interventions, right? All those dots, the spread of all those dots looks pretty darn familiar, right? Looks pretty darn similar, I should have said. And so they looked at it, and they actually had a data analyst who said, but folks, I hate to tell you this, but the intervention is not having any impact, right? It may be having a marginal impact for this kid up here, Or it may be having a marginal impact for this kid right here, and usually what we would do is we would grade that kid out and act like every single kid is having that kid's experience. Is that right? That's not true. That is not true. So at what point are we going to start to stand up and say, you know what? If it's not actually working well, we need to start rethinking what we're doing. They had an honest presentation. The head of the United Way that was putting money into this stood up in front of a room and said, guys, I hate to tell you this, we just looked at the data, and unfortunately, it's not working all that great. All right? But what we're going to do is rather than sitting there hanging our head, we're actually going to revise what we're doing. Instead of working in 9 schools, we're going to work in 5 schools. Right? We actually broke the data down a little more, and we saw that kids that were kind of in this range where they were only 20 to 40% positive on the assessment, those are the kids this is the sweet spot for. So we're going to target those kids. We're going to boost the amount of time from only 25 minutes of tutoring to like 50 minutes of tutoring, right? They're going to do some things to improve. They're not just sitting there and they're not just going to take the whole thing and throw it out. They're going to actually take the time to delve in and figure out what's not working and then improve on it. Does that make sense? And then they're not going to wait for an entire year to look at the data. They're going to look at the data week to week to week to week to week to week to see where these kids are so that they can constantly be improving over time. Does this make sense? So when I say fill up the walls with data, this is what I'm talking about. Who in this room, is my question, who in this room is going to have the courage to put their data on the wall? Good, bad, ugly. Right? It could be amazing data, and that would be wonderful. But even if it's not, who in this room is going to throw their data on the wall and say, you know what? I'm looking at this. I thought this school was the best school since sliced bread. But when we really looked at the data, it's not. Right? Right now, something's not right. We've got to figure something out. We're going to adjust. Fill up the walls with that stuff. What this is going to get you to is this conversation right here. I promise I'm just about done, because I'm sure you're worn out. I didn't get to run today, so you can tell. I'm like walking around the room. This is so great for me. It's not so great for you. Okay, so this is what they're getting to in Racine. What they kind of thought was they could take the old peanut butter approach to tutoring, right? And that's not true. They were differentiating a little bit. They were doing some really, strong evidence-based stuff. Just the implementation of it wasn't quite where it needed to be, I guess. Whatever. But what they're getting to is this. The difference between equality and equity. And they're starting to say, you know what, let's face it, it could be that this little guy right here may need a little bit more support. And that is okay. Maybe that's okay. Maybe what that means is that we do need to start expending a little bit more resources on kids that are a little bit further behind. And let's not sugarcoat that. Let's not act like we can just do the exact same thing for every kid, the old Walmart approach to educating children. We can't do the exact same thing for every kid. It may be that certain kids need certain things. And when you start to really break down that data, it starts to challenge you in this area. It starts to make you think, you know what? Maybe the way we're doing school funding, I guess I hear there's this lawsuit, and the education system writ large was found unconstitutional. Maybe we need to be thinking about how we break down how we fund education. And maybe if we knew the data that said what worked for certain kids and what doesn't, maybe we could start funding that stuff instead of just funding whatever feels good. Right? This is the tough conversations that when you get into these conversations, you start to get what we call systems change. And just to know what's on the horizon, what could be happening. In Cincinnati, Ohio right now, they've broken down the local data, and they have figured out there are certain early childhood practices that by far and away make sure that every kid is on, or those kids are on target developmentally by the time they get to kindergarten. The school board approved a levy, a $48 million levy, of the $48 million, 15 will not go to the school district. Let me say that one more time. $48 million school board levy, 15 million will not go to the school district. It is going to go to early childhood programs that are high quality to make sure that the kids that come to Cincinnati Public Schools are on target developmentally. That is systems change. The fact that we haven't found another place in the country where the school board has actually approved a levy where some of the money does not go to the system, right? It actually goes to pay for making sure the kids that come into the system are on target developmental. These are the kind of things, once you have a really good idea of what the data is on all your walls in here, you're gonna have to take some down some of these paintings. I'm sorry, the data's not gonna fit if we keep up the paintings. But those are the kind of things you can start doing. Some radical things to make sure the kids that need high quality support services are actually getting them, right? The good news is that all over the country right now, we're starting to see more communities get to proof point, which means here in Cincinnati, we're seeing, or there in Cincinnati, because I'm in Bridgeport, I just figured that out. But in Cincinnati, we're seeing positive trend lines. They just released their latest report card, continuing to see positive trend lines. All across the country, as we see more and more communities start to focus not just on what the collective's doing, but what individuals are doing against the outcomes that matter most, they are starting to see outcomes improve, right? They're not just talking collective impact and doing traditional collaboration. They're not, because that's what a lot of communities are doing. A lot of people have just taken one label, swapped it out, and thrown on another. Let me tell you, if you do that, you're going to be right where you've always been. But some of these communities, like Portland, Dallas, Seattle, Albuquerque, Tacoma, they are starting to see outcomes improve consistently because they are using data in a much more rigorous way. They are getting an infusion of some capital now because they're using data, but they didn't start with that. They started with breaking down the data, understanding what works, walking into a room that feels like the Matrix, and actually trying to figure out how to get better results for kids. So just yesterday, we've already heard from President Obama a couple times today. Sorry about that for those of you who may lean in a different political direction, but let's just go. So, just yesterday, President Obama was talking about the My Brother's Keeper initiative, right? And this is what he's going to dedicate his life to coming out of the administration. And he said, what I'm committed to is that we are going to apply data and evidence to social policy and find out what works, scale it up when it works, thereby fostering a new era of social innovation. Social innovation today is defined as who has the snazziest, new, coolest program. Who has the snazziest, new, coolest school design? Who has the snazziest, new, cool post-secondary initiative, right? Let me tell you, there's a great quote from a mentor of mine. He said, process is the new program. Process is the new program. And as much as that is a horrible thing to think about, we don't have a problem of innovation in the social sector. We innovate the heck out of everything, right? What we have a problem with is discipline. Is discipline and honesty and authenticity to acknowledge whether or not what we are doing is actually working for the kids who need our support the most. Right? I'm going to tell you that you're going to look at some of the data in here, you're going to see some things that are pretty discouraging. Right? The way to turn the tide on this is not to meet for 4 hours and then wait for the next meeting and come back again. The way to turn the tide on this is to go home right now. Don't wait. Don't wait till the next meeting. Find out whether or not what you're doing right now is actually impacting one of these outcomes. Find out and be honest about it. And if it's not, try to challenge your organization. Try to challenge everybody. This is, once again, not just practitioners, but funders, advocates, grassroots advocates. If you're advocating for early childhood education, don't just advocate for early childhood education, advocate for quality early childhood education, and look at the data and figure out what that is. Everybody in this room does not have to wait for collective impact to happen, because Frida and her team are making it happen. You all make it happen. So here's my encouragement to you. Don't wait anymore. Get started tomorrow. Fill up these walls with data so that whenever you walk into a room for Bridgeport Prospers going forward, you walk into that room and you find out something that works so you can go home and do what you're doing every day better. Does that sound good? All right. Thank you all very much.